1859. Virginia. A wooden church sits quiet in Rappahannock County. Sunday service like any other, until you look closer at the cemetery behind.
Infant graves.
Dozens of them, all dated the same year, all bearing the same last names. What happened here? Why did newborn babies die in such numbers? And why do the church records speak of cleansing the line and God's will for purity? The Mount Zion Baptist Church held a secret. Pastor Elijah Moorcock preached salvation. But behind those sermons lay something darker, a belief that bloodlines must stay clean, that certain children carried sin in their very bones, that fire could wash away what baptism could not touch. If you value documented American religious history like this, subscribe. It's the best way to support our work. Also comment from which city you're hearing this from. This script is researched and factual, using sources from the Rappahannock County Historical Society records and Virginia State Archives. Now back to the story. The congregation numbered 47 families, all related, all descended from 3 original settlers who arrived in 1728. The Moorcocks, the Whitlocks, the Carrs. 3 bloodlines that tangled and twisted through 5 generations. Marriage within marriage, cousin to cousin, brother's widow to brother. By 1859, every child born carried the blood of all 3 founding families. Pastor Moorcock stood 6 feet 4 inches tall, thin as a rail, eyes pale blue like winter sky. He'd taken over the church in 1856 when his father died. The congregation trusted him. They had to. He was their cousin, their nephew, their brother-in-law all rolled into one. The doctrine came slow. First sermon in March 1859. God's chosen people must remain pure. Second sermon in April. The sins of fathers pass through blood. Third sermon in May. Sometimes mercy means taking a child home early. Rebecca Whitlock gave birth on June 15, 1859.
Asson.
Healthy by all accounts, but something was wrong with his left arm. Twisted at the elbow. The midwife, Sarah Carr, took one look and shook her head. Mark of Cain, she whispered. Too much family blood. The baby lived 3 days. Church records show the burial on June 18th. Little Thomas Whitlock, age 3 days, called home by the Lord for his divine purpose. No mention of how he died. No doctor's name, just a small wooden marker and a grave 18 inches long. July brought 2 more births. Mary Carr delivered twins on the 7th. Both girls, both with the same pale blue eyes as their great-uncle pastor. One twin had 6 toes on her left foot. The other breathed wrong, making soft whistling sounds with each breath. They lasted 5 days. Pastor Moorcock held a special service that Sunday. The Lord tests our faith with afflicted children. These innocent souls carry the weight of generations. Sometimes His mercy calls them home before sin can take root. The congregation nodded. They sang hymns. They prayed for strength. And they watched as tiny caskets disappeared into Virginia clay. August, September, October, the pattern held. Every birth brought inspection. Every defect brought whispers. Every whisper brought death within a week. The method stayed the same. Parents would bring the child to the church at midnight. Pastor Moorcock would examine the baby by candlelight. He'd place his hands on the small chest and pray. If God spoke, the child lived. If God stayed silent, the purification began. They used the church fireplace, built for heating but deep enough for other purposes. Pine logs soaked in whale oil burned hot and clean. The parents would hold the baby down. Pastor Moorcock would speak the words, "Lord, receive this pure soul before sin can poison the bloodline." The ritual had rules, strict ones, written in Pastor Moorcock's private journal, found decades later in his brother's attic. Parents must fast for 3 days before bringing the child. The baby must wear white cloth, sewn by the mother's own hands. No crying allowed during the examination. Tears showed doubt in God's plan. The church deacon, William Whitlock, kept detailed records of each ceremony. Time of arrival, weather conditions, position of the moon. He believed celestial alignment affected the ritual's purity. Full moon ceremonies lasted longer. New moon ceremonies ended faster. The babies seemed to fight less when darkness covered the sky. Sarah Carr, the midwife, developed her own signs for determining which children needed cleansing. Birthmarks larger than a silver dollar. Any limb shorter than standard measurements she kept in a leather notebook. Unusual eye colors. Hair growing in patches. Breathing problems. Crying that sounded too animal-like. Her criteria grew stricter with each birth. By October, she was marking babies for minor imperfections. A slightly crooked finger. One ear positioned higher than the other. Skin too pale or too dark compared to family standards. The bar for perfection rose until almost every child failed her inspection. The first resistance came from Martha Moorcock, the pastor's own sister. She gave birth on August 3, 1859. Twin boys, one perfect, one born with a cleft lip that split his mouth in half. Pastor Moorcock demanded both children for examination. Martha refused to bring the imperfect twin. "He's my blood," she told her brother. "Your blood, our father's blood. You want to burn your own nephew?" The congregation chose sides. Half supported Martha's defiance. Half demanded obedience to God's will through Pastor Moorcock. The church split down family lines. Moorcocks against Whitlocks. Carrs against everyone. Pastor Moorcock settled the dispute with Scripture. 1 Corinthians, chapter 5, verse 13. "Remove the wicked person from among yourselves." He declared Martha corrupted by maternal weakness. Her perfect twin could stay. The imperfect one must be cleansed, or both children would carry eternal damnation. Martha Moorcock held out for 6 days. Her husband, Jonathan Whitlock, finally broke her resolve. Not with violence, with economics. The family owned 200 acres of tobacco farmland. All church members, all potential workers, all threatening boycott if Martha continued her rebellion. She brought both boys on August 9th. The perfect twin lived. The imperfect twin burned. Martha Moorcock never entered the church again. She'd sit outside during services, listening through the windows. When winter came, she'd stand in snow rather than step inside where her son died. 12 babies died between June and November 1859, all within days of birth, all buried in the same corner of Mount Zion Cemetery, all recorded as natural death by God's will. But one mother broke. Elizabeth Carr gave birth on November 23rd. A daughter, perfect in every way except for a small birthmark on her right shoulder. Dark red like spilled wine. Elizabeth begged. The baby was healthy. The mark meant nothing. "Please, Pastor Moorcock, please spare her." The congregation gathered for the midnight ritual. Elizabeth clutched her daughter tight. "She's perfect," she sobbed. "God made her perfect." Pastor Moorcock reached for the child. Elizabeth pulled away.
No.
"I won't let you. She's mine. She's perfect." The struggle lasted minutes. Elizabeth fought like a wild animal protecting her young. But 46 adults against one desperate mother made no contest. They held her down while Pastor Moorcock took the baby. The child's cries echoed through the wooden church until they didn't. Elizabeth Carr never spoke again. She sat in her pew every Sunday until the day she died. 1867. 8 years of silence. Her gravestone reads, "Mother of Angels, Keeper of Secrets." If you value documented stories like this, subscribe for more hidden American history. Comment your city below. This research comes from Virginia State Archives and Rappahannock County Court records. Now back to Mount Zion. Winter brought investigation. Dr. Samuel Henning rode through Rappahannock County in December 1859, checking on infant mortality rates for the state medical board. Normal counties showed 2 or 3 infant deaths per 100 births. Mount Zion reported 47 infant deaths from just 47 families. Dr. Henning asked questions. Where were the attending physicians? Why no medical records? How did so many babies die of natural causes within days of birth? Pastor Moorcock met with Dr. Henning on December 15th. They spoke for 3 hours in the church office. "Dr. Henning left with promises of full medical documentation by February. The conversation didn't go as planned. Dr. Henning's notes, recovered from his home after his death, reveal the truth of that meeting. Pastor Moorcock showed him the church records, detailed documentation of each death, medical explanations for every infant mortality, congenital heart defects, respiratory failure, feeding difficulties, all signed by Dr. Theodore Carr, the local physician. But Dr. Carr had died in 1856, 3 years before the deaths began. His signature appeared on certificates dated months after his burial. Dr. Henning confronted Pastor Moorcock about the forgeries. The pastor's response chilled him. Sometimes God works through the dead as well as the living. Dr. Carr's spirit guides my medical knowledge. Dr. Henning threatened to report the fraudulent certificates to Virginia authorities. Pastor Moorcock smiled and opened his desk drawer. Inside lay a loaded Colt Navy revolver and a leather notebook filled with names. Every family member who'd ever opposed the purification rituals. Their addresses, their daily routines, their children's names and ages. Dr. Henning, Pastor Moorcock said, Rappahannock County can be dangerous for outsiders who don't understand our ways. Those documents never came. Instead, Dr. Henning found his horse dead in his stable 3 days later. Poisoned, his medical bag stolen, his notes on Mount Zion missing. The message was clear. Some secrets stayed buried, but paper trails run deeper than graves. Virginia State Archives hold the original birth and death certificates, filed by Pastor Moorcock himself, required by law since 1857. The dates tell the story his sermons couldn't hide. The archives also contain something else. Letters, dozens of them, written by congregation members to relatives outside Rappahannock County. Most burned before sending. A few survived in family collections donated years later. Rebecca Whitlock wrote to her sister in Richmond on September 20th, 1859. The Lord tests us sorely, dear sister. My Thomas rests with Jesus now, his small imperfections cleansed by divine fire. Pastor Moorcock says his soul flies pure to heaven. I try to believe. I try not to remember his cries. William Carr wrote to his brother in Norfolk on October 1st. Business suffers here. Too many tiny coffins to build. Too many graves to dig. My hands shake when I measure the wood. 18 inches long, 12 inches wide, 8 inches deep. The same measurements over and over. Sometimes I hear crying from the lumber yard at night. Mary Whitlock's letter to her mother, never sent, found in her Bible after she died. God forgive me. God forgive us all. I held her down while Pastor Moorcock spoke the words. My own daughter, perfect except for one extra toe. I held her down and watched her burn. The smell lingers in my hair, in my clothes, in my soul. 13 births recorded between March and December 1859. 12 deaths within 7 days. One survivor lived because she showed no defects. She grew up, married outside the county, and died in Richmond 1893. Her descendants still live in Virginia today. Her name was Grace Carr, born November 30th, 1859, the last baby born at Mount Zion that year. Her mother, Helen Carr, had watched 11 other infants die before her daughter's birth. She spent her pregnancy in constant prayer, begging God for a perfect child. Grace arrived flawless. 10 fingers, 10 toes, clear breathing, bright eyes, no birthmarks, no deformities, no excuse for the ritual. Pastor Moorcock examined her 3 times by candlelight, searching for any flaw that would justify purification. He found nothing. The congregation celebrated Grace's perfection as proof of their righteousness. God had finally blessed their bloodline cleansing with a pure child. They baptized her the next Sunday with great ceremony. The first infant baptism at Mount Zion in 6 months. Grace Carr lived to be 94 years old. She never spoke publicly about Mount Zion until 1947, when a newspaper reporter tracked her down in Richmond. Her words, printed in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, "I was the lucky one. I was born perfect. 12 other babies weren't. I've spent 88 years wondering why God saved me and not them. The church records go deeper. Pastor Moorcock kept detailed notes on bloodline purity. Charts showing which families produced clean children and which carried the taint. Measurements of skull circumference, limb length, finger count. Biblical justifications for mercy killings. One entry from September reads, "The Lord spoke clearly through little James Moorcock's twisted spine. His soul flies pure to heaven while his corrupted flesh feeds the flames of righteousness." James Moorcock was Pastor Moorcock's own nephew. The practice ended not from conscience but from necessity. By December 1859, the surviving children weren't reproducing. Too few marriages. Too much fear. The bloodlines Pastor Moorcock fought to purify were dying out naturally. But ending the infant killings didn't end the obsession with bloodline purity. Pastor Moorcock turned his attention to the living children. Those who'd survived his examinations. Those born before the purification began. Those he now saw as potential carriers of family corruption. He instituted weekly inspections. Every child under 16 reported to the church for physical and mental examination. Height measurements, weight recordings, reflex tests, memory challenges. Any deviation from Pastor Moorcock's standards meant immediate isolation from the community. 7 children failed these inspections between December 1859 and February 1860. They weren't killed. Something worse. They were declared spiritually contaminated and forbidden from attending church, school, or family gatherings. Shunned completely. Left to survive on scraps and charity from secretly sympathetic relatives. The oldest of these outcasts was 12-year-old Samuel Whitlock. His crime? A slight limp from a broken leg that healed crooked when he was 8. Pastor Moorcock declared the limp evidence of generational sin manifesting in the flesh. Samuel's own parents cast him out rather than face excommunication themselves. Samuel lived in the church woodshed through the winter of 1859 to 1860, fed by his sister Martha, who snuck him food after dark. One night in February, Martha found the shed empty. Samuel was gone, vanished without trace. His parents never reported him missing. Local legend says Samuel Whitlock wandered the Virginia wilderness for decades. A wild man spotted by hunters and travelers. Always limping, always alone, always watching Mount Zion from the forest edge. The last confirmed sighting came in 1895. An old man with white hair and a familiar limp, standing in the ruins where the church once stood. Mount Zion Baptist Church closed its doors on Christmas Day 1859. Pastor Moorcock preached his final sermon to empty pews. The congregation had scattered. Some moved west, others south. A few just disappeared into the Virginia wilderness. The building stood empty for 40 years. Local children reported strange sounds from inside, crying that came and went with the wind. Parents warned them away. That place holds more than memories, old-timers would say. Some spirits don't rest easy. Pastor Moorcock himself vanished 3 days after closing the church. His house stood empty. His belongings remained undisturbed. His horse stayed in the stable. But Elijah Moorcock disappeared as completely as if the earth had swallowed him whole. Some said he fled west to avoid investigation. Others believed he died by suicide, unable to face the consequences of his actions. The truth emerged 40 years later when workers demolished his house. They found a hidden room beneath the cellar floor. Stone walls, iron door, a single chair facing a crude altar made from church pew wood. On the altar sat 12 small skulls, infant skulls, each marked with a name, a date, and a biblical verse about purification. The skulls weren't from the babies who burned. Those remains stayed in the church fireplace pit. These came from somewhere else. 12 other children, babies who died before the purification rituals began. Natural deaths, stillbirths, accidents, all carefully collected and preserved by Pastor Moorcock as pure specimens of the bloodlines he sought to protect. The hidden room told a darker story. Pastor Moorcock hadn't started killing babies in 1859. He'd been planning it for years, studying infant mortality, collecting samples, building his theology of purification around a secret shrine to dead children. The workers also found Pastor Moorcock's final journal. 300 pages of increasingly erratic handwriting, biblical quotations mixed with family genealogy, measurements and calculations, plans for expanding the purification program beyond infants to include older children, adults, and eventually entire family lines deemed contaminated. The final entry, dated December 28, 1859, read, "God has shown me the complete vision, not just the babies, all of them, every impure soul in every impure body. Fire will cleanse the whole bloodline, or fire will cleanse me first." Below that, in different ink, shakier handwriting, I cannot. God forgive me, I cannot." The church burned down in 1899, lightning strike during a summer storm, or so the fire marshal reported. Local families knew better. They'd been waiting 40 years for God to finish what Pastor Moorcock started. But the cemetery remained. 47 small graves in neat rows behind where the altar used to stand. Most markers weathered blank by 1900. Names forgotten. Stories buried with the bones. Except for one detail the flames couldn't touch. In 1967, developers broke ground for a new subdivision where Mount Zion once stood. The construction crew found a brick-lined pit beneath the old church foundation, 12 feet deep, 8 feet wide, filled with ash and fragments of tiny bones. Chemical analysis confirmed whale oil residue. Carbon dating placed the remains at 1859. The bone fragments came from infants. All died from extreme heat exposure. All showed evidence of being alive when the burning began. The developer sealed the pit, built houses over it, told no one what they'd found, but property records show the truth. Lot 27, Peaceful Valley Subdivision, Rappahannock County, Virginia, where Pastor Moorcock's fireplace once stood, where perfect children died for imperfect bloodlines. The families scattered, but their descendants remained in Virginia. Census records track the surviving bloodlines through generations. The Moorcocks died out by 1910. The Whitlocks lasted until 1943. The Carr line continues today. They still live in Rappahannock County. Still attend church every Sunday. Different church, different pastor. Same county roads that carried 12 tiny coffins in 1859. Court records from 1968 reveal one final detail. The development company that bought the Mount Zion property paid cash.
No mortgage.
No bank involvement. The buyer's name on the deed, Thomas Carr, great-grandson of Elizabeth Carr, the mother who fought to save her daughter and lost everything trying. Thomas Carr built his house directly over the old cemetery. Kitchen window faces the spot where his great-grandmother's perfect baby lies buried. Every morning for 30 years, he's eaten breakfast looking at that ground. In 1998, a reporter asked why he chose that exact spot for his house. Thomas Carr smiled and poured his coffee. "Some places need watching," he said. "Some stories need keeping." He died in 2003, natural causes. His gravestone sits in the new Rappahannock Memorial Cemetery, far from Mount Zion, far from the burning ground, but not far enough from the truth. The Mount Zion records still exist in Virginia State Archives. Box 14, Drawer 3, Shelf 7. 12 death certificates, 13 birth certificates, 1 church ledger with Pastor Moorcock's handwriting, and 47 small graves that prove what happens when faith turns to fire. Perfect children, imperfect world, 12 lives burned away to keep bloodlines pure. The arithmetic of madness written in ash and bone beneath a Virginia subdivision where families now sleep above the secret Mount Zion tried to bury. But secrets, like smoke, find their way to the surface.